Hey, it's adult time again. Whee! Glad you tuned in. Hey, the topic today is idiom or idioms. And you're going, oh no, we talked about that in grade school or junior high English class. Idioms are fun if you grew up with the language and and you know them. But if you didn't grow up speaking a given language and you're trying to learn it, idioms can be a challenge until you're told what they mean. Here's what this author I'm looking at right now says. An idiom is a saying that foreigners cannot understand. We say one thing, but we mean another. Yeah. If we say, so-and-so was born with a silver spoon in their mouth, we know what we're saying. But if you're from another country and you've never heard that expression, that idiom, you're thinking to yourself, a baby born with a spoon in its mouth? Really? you know? Right. In other words, if you don't get it, you don't get it. Oh man, you don't really realize how many idioms we have in our language until you have a guest, a friend maybe from another culture who doesn't know them yet. And you just, you're driving around or whatever, and you say these things that we just take for granted that are kind of fun. And they're like, they just don't get it. I've had the opportunity to work with Sudanese, people from Sudan. Omaha was a place where a lot of Sudanese congregated, and our church had a worshiping group of Sudanese. And so working with them, you just learned over and over again how strange learning a language is. Okay, well, all this sounds like on the level of fun or no fun, but one of the places where idiom or not understanding expressions can be difficult is with the Bible. And just for a few bucks, I found on Amazon, Idioms in the Bible Explained. Yeah. It's not a new book. It was written originally back in 1931, and the author renewed the copyright, which I think means there were additional printings a couple times after that. But it's an old enough book that I have to kind of sometimes check out with other sources to make sure that the guy knows what he's talking about. But what's neat is this author, whose last name is Lamsa, he grew up speaking Aramaic, which is the language Jesus spoke. That is just incredible. Incredible. What a resource. There are still people who speak the language Jesus spoke. Now, of course, it's probably shifted a little bit in 2,000 years, but in many ways, that's one thing the Middle East is good at, to the good and to the bad, is preserving the past, things from the past. So you can be fairly confident that this guy who grew up speaking the language knows what he's talking about. One of the ones that, see, what happens if you don't get it is you find yourself focusing on things that have nothing to do with what is being said. How many of us have wondered when Jesus says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut them off. Well, so we might start thinking, did he mean amputate? At one time I worked in a mental hospital, and I worked with some people that really had great challenges mentally functioning. And things like this, oh man, I can't remember working with anyone who had cut their hand off, but that literal thinking. I preached one time on Jesus in the Gospel of John says, I am the bread of heaven. I have come down from heaven. And I said in this sermon, this doesn't mean that a loaf of bread came out of the clouds down to us. And someone who was listening said, yes, that's what he meant. You know, because literal thinking. And it can put an undue burden on people, thinking their faith has to believe something that Jesus never intended. So this guy who grew up in Jesus's culture and language says that the saying, if your hand or your foot cause you to sin, cut them off, means stop stealing. That's it. Stop stealing. Oh, think of all the sermonizing and the thinking that has been distracted by not knowing the language well enough. And even if you know the language, even if you know the words in the language for cut it off, if you don't know you're dealing with an idiom, you're still off track. So anyway, helpful book, Idioms. I tell you what, if once you know or you get kind of the hang of it, and someone, you have a source to point out where an idiom is being used, it's really cool. Idioms, like I said originally, are fun if you get them. Why say that, oh, he was born rich, when you can say he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth? See? It's more fun that way. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed this one. Idioms. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.